I'll do a quick intro as well, in my usual way, right? So good morning, everyone. Britt Simon here, and I'm joined at the moment by Philip and Roberto. We're going to have a panel discussion this morning, live panel discussion. And the topic for today's discussion is going to be about all of the sort of the things that could be happening going on with the new administration. Trump, Musk, and other senators and representatives are doing various things, and particularly the reduction in staff that's being talked about is causing some fear. And I think the bill that's been introduced by Representative Mike Collins has also causing some fear. So I wanted to talk through those and hear from smart guys that I respect enormously. Let's just bring Stoic in. Morning, Stoic. How you doing?
Good morning. How is everyone?
Yeah, very good, very good. So that's the topic, Stoic. You just missed the preamble. We just had a quick sort of connect before we went live, but we're live now. That's the sort of the topic that I want to take. Can I just say to the people asking questions, this is the topic. I don't really want to get into questions about other questions you may have, right? So I'd like to sort of, if you have questions about the topic we're discussing, then by all means ask those. But generally speaking, if your question is a normal question, you can ask me that at BritSimonSays.com, or you can go on the Telegram channels and speak to these fine gentlemen. So each of you three are all DV25 candidates, right? Selectees, is that correct? Okay. And just Stoic, where do you hail from?
Well, I'm based in Washington, D.C., so I live in the United States. Okay. But as my name suggests, I'm a Turkish national.
Right. Yeah. Are you planning to adjust status in the States?
That is the plan, yes.
Okay. And can you give your rough, I'm sure people will want to know, your rough case number?
It's just under 26,500.
EU, okay. Philip, I know you're at around about 29K, right? EU. And Philip, you hail from Romania, correct?
Yeah, from Romania.
Okay. And Philip, for those that don't frequent the Telegram channels, Philip is someone that extracts data and confirms the data that Zarthisius posts weekly. And Philip is often drawing data on other days of the week as well. So we get more or less live updates from Philip, which I'm sure the whole community greatly appreciates. Such as there's been nearly 1,900 2NLs sent this week. So that's kind of interesting that Philip has confirmed there's about 700 have gone since Zarthisius's Friday update. So it's kind of interesting. The intern is working at the weekend, we think. And Roberto, you're chargeable.
26K, yeah.
26K, okay, and chargeable to Italy, right?
Yeah, exactly, in Naples.
Okay. So you're all EU. I know there was a gentleman in the Telegram channel, Surajan, who is sort of speaking on behalf of Nepalese. And I think in Nepal, there's been a lot of fear created by a bill. I want to just show that bill briefly, if I may. Let's just, how do I do that? Like that. Yeah. There's a bill being introduced by this guy, Mike Collins. So let's just talk about this one first of all. There is this bill. Mike Collins, who's a representative, so the House of Representatives introduced a bill called the Security and Fairness Enhancement for America Act, or it's SAFE. And that bill is specifically and only there to try and remove the DV lottery. I think that bill has been let's say publicized, particularly in Nepal, but probably in other countries, as being, oh my gosh, the world is ending, DV lottery is about to end. I just wanted to point out, and Philip, I know you've done a little bit of research on this as well, but this bill is a reintroduction of the bill. And there have been various versions. So this is Mike Collins reintroducing the bill in 2025. This is the various references to the 2023-24 session of Congress, the 118th Congress. It also was in the 117th Congress. These Congress terms are 2 years terms. So when we're talking about this bill was in the 117th Congress, that's 2021. Then it was in the 118th, and we're now in the 119th Congress. So in other words, they've tried this 3 times, and it never gets out of committee, right? There's been other bills. John Kennedy has been trying. The earliest one that I could remember was the 2017 one. There was a bill introduced by Senator John Kennedy in the Senate. That was 2017, purely to repeal the DV lottery. He tried again later, I believe, in 21 as well. It's going on all the time. There's another guy, Bill, I think it's Bill Posey, who introduced this bill, which was then copied into the one that Mike Collins has just released, right? So what I'm trying to say there is that, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but these bills, for as long as I've been doing DV lottery, which is since 2013, I think there's always been a bill lurking around in the background somewhere trying to end this lottery. And what they're trying to do is trying to end that and move towards more of a points-based system. Personally, I don't feel very concerned about this bill, but do you guys see it differently? Philip, I think you'd looked into this a little bit, right?
Yeah. As far as I found, the first safe bill they tried to introduce was back in 2004, so way before.
Right.
And it never got any chance since then.
Right. So the process, as I understand it, and I'm not a government expert by any means, but the process is that some representative or senator can introduce a bill into their respective houses. That bill will then go through committees, and and basically the committees are smaller groups of representatives or senators to discuss certain topics. And they may feel that this bill should be referred to a different committee, or they may feel this isn't worth discussing in this committee at the moment. We've got more important things to do, right? And that's just the committee stage. If it gets beyond the committee stage, it then may go to a vote in the House, have to get through the House of Representatives and the Senate in order to then get in front of the president. That process is a very long, drawn-out process. I don't think it's a quick thing at all. And it's this particular bill and other versions of it, as far as I'm aware, have never come up for a direct vote, meaning they've never got past committee. There may be other bills that combine other actions with this, but I don't think this bill by itself, to just repeal the DV lottery, I don't think it's ever been up for a vote even, because it's normally used as a pawn, which I can explain in a moment, but it's normally used in a pawn that way. So I don't think it's, I don't think it's the thing to worry about. Roberto, sorry, go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And it takes a long time. So,
and I wanted to say, even if it gets in, for example, the Senate, the Republicans that do have 53 votes, even if they all voted for this, they need additional 7 to pass it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think
it will be a concern maybe for DV27, not for 25 or 26, even 26.
Well, and that's the other thing, exactly. A bill that's written normally won't be introduced and take effect immediately. It comes to a later point. So the question would be, let's say, could they get this through by May before the DV26 results are passed? No, that's almost a certain no. There's literally not enough time for them to get it through. But if they did, could they stop DV26? Well, since they hadn't published the results, in theory, they could stop the results being published at DV26. But they can't just stop the DV25 process just like that. That's not how government works, right? So, Stoic, did you say you're in Washington?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Are you involved? Do you see the periphery? I mean, 90% of the people in Washington are involved in government. I wondered if you had a perspective about that.
Well, not specifically regarding this bill. One thing I would like to say about this bill is that, as Philip said, the Republican senators or representatives won't be able to pass the bill, even if it makes it to the voting floor. Right. And usually, as far as I understand, law drafts, like how a bill is passed, there needs to be some kind of negotiation. So the Democrats that needs to be convinced need to get something out of it. So therefore, a bill that is aimed at only canceling the DV program will never succeed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think you're exactly right, Stuart. That's what I was mentioning about the pawn. So let's say Republicans want to cancel the lottery. The Dems are going to say, look, if you want our support, we want something for dreamers, for example. We want, we want the dreamers to be protected. So give us that and we'll give you the other thing. Now, and that's how they compromise. They meet in the middle somewhere. So the DV lottery at some point, and I discussed this with Jesse one time before, but at some point could become a negotiating piece or a negotiating pawn in the whole sort of picture, to try and gain something that the Dems believe is more valuable than the lottery. That's the way it will go down if it ever goes down, frankly.
Yeah, you're right. Because maybe we are a little bit overestimating DV right now, because we're part of it. But
exactly.
Yeah,
we tend to think it's the most important thing in the world, Roberto, right?
And it has to be a part of a broader reform or something like that. Otherwise, no one cares about DV.
Exactly. And so there are over 1 million immigrant visas issued a year, right? And we get 50,000 of them. So I mean, we're talking about 5%. It's the tail end of a very big system, and it's not the biggest, most important thing. There are 10 or 12 million dreamers in this country already. And those are considered, frankly, more important to protect than DV lottery. Yes, from the Dem side, but even if you went down party lines to get all of the Republicans to agree with something, or all of the Democrats to agree with something, even that's hard. They've all got different opinions on how things need to be done. So it's generally only where there is a sort of a whipping or a push to get all of the Republicans in line, let's say, and try and win over 2 or 3 of the Democrats to try and make up the difference. But those things are very rare. I don't think it's important enough to anybody to actually do that argument. Okay, interesting. I appreciate your perspectives on that. So for Nepal in particular, we don't think, and I don't think this panel is particularly unusual in terms of the experiences we've got, etc. I don't think any of us, I don't know, tell me if you're wrong, but I don't think any of us are expert in government. But at the same time, from a common sense point of view, you can see the difficulties with getting the number of votes, getting the interest, getting through committee, getting through the House of Representatives, and then the Senate, and then in front of the president. Of course, the president will sign anything that's anti-immigration for sure. But unless Trump sort of makes it a bigger issue and tries to force a bill through that way, I don't think this is going anywhere personally. So for Nepal, please calm the heck down. I don't think you've got a problem personally. Okay. Now, when Trump became president back in November, that dark day back in November, I made some videos around about that time, and I remember speaking to Jesse, and we talked about what he could do. Like we said, could he just stop the lottery? No, he can't do that because he's not a king. It needs this process of government that we've just spoken about. But we also discussed that he could make things more difficult with either increasing the levels of background checks, for example, that DV lottery and other immigration cases have to go through, or by introducing targeted country-specific bans, travel bans on some countries, which is, I think, likely to happen. Personally, the travel bans thing, I think, will happen in probably less than 2 months now. And the other thing that he can do, as we now see, and I think this is the sort of the Department of Government Efficiency Doge thing, is a reduction of staff numbers, right? So, Roberto, I think you were sort of saying that's the sort of most realistic worry that you've got, right?
Sure, yeah. Because the main problem is that in our case, the DV selectees, we have a strict deadline. That's a problem.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Delaying it is not a problem of postponing it. It's a problem of losing the chance, because you have a strict deadline. We have the case law that says that. We have the Court of Appeals of DC that said that there's no way to extend that deadline. There's no way.
Yep.
And Curtis said that judges cannot reserve visas beyond that term. So we have a deadline. And I think we are the only EV category which has a deadline. So that's the problem. Yeah. Delaying it is not postponing and waiting a little bit more, but it's about losing your chance. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. That's my point of view on that. So
yeah.
That's the problem.
Let's talk about Italy for a minute. So there are consulates you said 3 places, I think. Which are they?
We've got an embassy in Rome and 3 consulates, one in Milan, the other one in Florence, and the Naples one. Okay. And the only one that deals with the IV, it's Naples. It's strange because, for example, Rome, which is an embassy, deals only with non-immigrant visas. That's a little bit strange, but that's how it works here. So.
Yeah, and I don't know the history, Roberto, of why the immigrant work is done at Naples rather than Rome. But in general, there would be so there's effectively 4 places just in Italy alone where, in theory, sort of non-immigrant visas could be processed, let's say, and immigrant visas can only be processed in one of them, Naples, and DV is only at Naples, right? Yeah. So. I should probably say about DV, because I'm not 100% sure that there's no immigrant visas processed in Rome. That might be the case. But let's say the government decided that they want to cut down expenses on embassies in a country, and let's use Italy as an example. They could close consulates. They could close Naples. They could close other consulates and say, hey, we're only going to work with the embassy in Rome. But there's a cost of doing that, and somebody's going to say, hang on a minute. The cost of our premises in Rome is very high compared to Naples. Rome is a sort of a figurehead type embassy. We want to have that important embassy, but it's not necessarily where we want to do paperwork, right? And so we would rather do the paperwork in perhaps, what might be a cheaper or larger building, quite literally, in Naples, right, for office type work, as opposed to where the figurehead, where the ambassador is located, which is typically at the embassy itself, right, in Rome. So, but I don't think they can get to the point where they just say, hey, we're going to close our immigrant visa capability in this country or that country. I don't think that can happen, because one of the things that you've got to be able to do, if I'm a US citizen, as I am, and I want to sponsor my, my kid or whatever, there are certain not time-sensitive, immediate relative categories that have to be processed straight away. And that's a promise made to me, if you like, by the US government. They have to be done. So you can't say there are going to be no immigrant visas, because if a US citizen sponsors their kid who happens to be in Italy, that there's got to be a place that can handle that, right? And where you've got some immigrant visa processing being done, you can train those staff to take on different cases. So IR category and DV category and other family-based or work employment-based categories. There are things that have to be done by these consulates and embassies, and I don't think you can just decide to sort of close shop, in even any country, let alone Italy. So I don't think you need to worry, Roberto, personally.
Yeah, I agree. The only problem is delaying, the DV process. Yeah. Because of that deadline. That's a problem. Okay. I'm not worrying about shutting down any kind of IV activity or no. I mean, it makes
so
no
there
sense.
was a video posted in the Telegram chat this morning, I think it was, which was an immigration lawyer from San Diego, I think. And he was saying that this presidential action that was published a couple of days ago, executive order on February 12th, it was published, is the beginning of reduction of staff in embassies around the world, right? And so I thought that's a bit odd. I read this executive order. I don't know if you guys have seen this one. Have you seen this at all? No? Okay.
Just the title.
Yeah. So essentially, just reading through, it's short because, Trump writes with a Sharpie, so they're not long. It's pretty easy to read. But basically, what this says is that any staff at any embassy around the world or anyone working abroad, and there are 25,000 federal workers who work abroad in the world, right? What this basically says is that all of those staff, no matter what role they perform, have to be representing the wishes of America, the tone of America, etc. In other words, whatever Trump wants to say, right? And it empowers the Secretary of State to apply a disciplinary process which can result in firing of an employee who runs around saying Trump's an idiot, right? Or whatever they say, right? That's what this is about. It's not actually an announcement of a reduction of staff. So I wanted to address that video by the San Diego immigration lawyer. I don't think it's about that. I think there is a different discussion, which is about a general reduction in staff in general. But this particular one, I don't think is a problem. But there's a lot of rumor and fear being created because we don't quite know what the next thing they will do will be, right? So, Stoic, did you say you'd seen this one, or you'd only read the
I've skimmed over it. The first two paragraphs are about how the president is powerful and has the executive power.
Yeah.
And as you said, the following paragraphs are about how the Secretary of State can do pretty much anything. There is one interesting article there that talks about how the Secretary himself could change the FAM.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. In fact, has instructed them to modify any documentation. Where's the FAM? The FAM guide, sole discretion, blah, blah, blah. I think it was in this one. Yeah. The Secretary shall, consistent with applicable law, revise or replace the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is the FAM. That's the guide for consular officers, etc. That's how they're supposed to work. This is the guidebook we often refer to find out how they're supposed to handle DV cases, right? And direct subordinate agencies to remove, amend, or replace any handbooks, procedures, or guidance. So yeah, this is the Secretary of State is Rubio, right? Mm-hmm. Now he's not a nutcase. He's right wing, yes, and he's politically ambitious, so he's doing what Trump tells him. And he's prepared to look into a camera and say, yes, I believe in blowing up kids in Palestine or whatever. I mean, he's prepared to say those things, right? But in terms of, going absolutely nuts on just sort of firing a bunch of people because they happen to have sent an email saying they don't like Trump, I don't think that we're quite at that point, frankly. There's, I don't know. I just have a suspicion that he is a bit more logical than Trump, in all honesty, and I don't think he's going to do some of this stuff. And plus, replacing the Foreign Affairs Manual is bloody huge. It's not something that would happen overnight. This is a multi-year, process to sort of rewrite large sections of FAM. I don't see that happening. Okay, so then. The topic I'm really interested in talking about is the reduction of staff numbers that have been made. Now, what have you guys heard about this reduction of staff numbers? Have you heard any numbers? I've heard some, but I don't know if they're right.
The ones that I heard is about 10% per embassy to be cut from the staff.
Right.
I saw an article on Reuters, I think.
Okay. And did they say which sort of staff, or is it American workers? So at an embassy, there'll be a lot of local people working at an embassy, and then there'll be consular officers who typically will be Americans posted abroad, right?
Yeah.
So
I think in that article it mentioned both U.S. employees and local staff.
Okay. So Now, could that be, I don't know how many staff are at a typical embassy, but let's just sort of assume, a typical embassy might have administrative staff, they'll have janitorial staff, they'll have consular officers. They might have, let's say, a typical embassy might have 3 or 4 consular officers, and not a very big one. Abu Dhabi, for example, has 2 working consular officers at the moment. And so you can't get a 10% reduction from 2 unless they've got some way of, doing something I don't understand. So I can imagine a very large embassy that had maybe 20 consular officers, if such a thing exists, like London, for example. I could imagine that they would say, okay, we're going to cut that down to 18 from the 20 consular officers that were there, and a similar reduction in the supporting staff that are supporting those activities, right, which would be administrative staff. I don't think that's going to massively increase backlogs with even that sort of reduction. If that sort of reduction goes ahead, I personally don't see that. I don't know. I mean, so 10% is interesting. I'd heard a number of, they offered this ability to resign to a bunch of people. There was a representative went in front of Congress the other day and said, hang on a minute, that's 40,000 people have said yes, they would like to take the early dismissal, early retirement, or whatever. And 40,000 people, he was making the point that that's going to save us $6 billion a year. He calculated out the cost of those 40,000 people, $6 billion a year, which is 10% of our, is 1 day's worth, rather, of our national debt, the interest payments, or something bizarre. I mean, it's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. It's also nothing if that 40,000 number is correct. There are about 2 million federal employees. So 40,000 is, a tiny amount, 2% of that overall, sort of amount of federal employees. I personally don't think that's anything to sort of lose my mind about. But have you heard any other numbers, Roberto Stoic? Have you heard anything else? No.
No.
I mean, in Washington, 20,000, 30, 40,000 people suddenly losing their job. Yeah, that's going to be locally. That's going to be, pretty bad. Stoic, your house value is probably going to go down. Or maybe rents will go down. I don't know.
I am not a homeowner, so
yeah, okay.
I'm not very worried about.
You need to be a homeowner, Stoic.
I agree.
But yeah, I mean, I think it will have localized impacts. There's going to be certain departments just almost wiped out, and we're embarrassing ourselves on the world stage with some of those things. But they will be localized. I don't think there'll be a similar sort of reduction in embassies where, like I said earlier, they need to do certain work. That's just my opinion, but I don't think we've got anything more solid than that. The 10% Reuters number is interesting, Philip. I appreciate you bringing that up.
That is definitely an interesting number. And I'm thinking if it is actually true, if they cut down 10% of all the foreign service workers in each embassy, then the embassies that will be affected the most will probably be those that are large and at the same time overworked. Which I don't know which ones they would be. Maybe Cairo. Ankara is probably one of them, but that doesn't mean anything. We know that Ankara is not really performing. Overall,
much worse, could it?
And overall friction is less likely, I think, if 10% of the workforce is separated, then the effect will probably be more regional than global.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And taking the case of Italy, for example, for Roberto, they could achieve a 10% reduction in the country by closing, let's say, one of the lesser valuable consulates.
I agree. Maybe 3 consulates and 1 embassy, it's way too much for Italy. So I can agree with that.
Right.
So as long as you, let's say, optimize the workflows, that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as that's the point. I'm not against that.
So I think that's a good point. So hopefully there are smart, well-meaning people out there that want to do what the president is telling him to do, and whatever President Musk tells them to do. They want to do that, but at the same time, they want to do it in an optimized way, Roberto, to use your word there, to say, okay, but we still have got a job to do. We want to cut down some costs. So let's retract, let's close that little consulate that doesn't do very much. It won't be very impactful, and we'll take that work in-house. They did a similar thing with Frankfurt Embassy, where it became the processing center for several countries. And I think, is it Amsterdam maybe, or Scandinavia? I'm not sure which. I think that's similar up there as well. Philip, do you know that one? Have you seen any evidence of those?
Yeah, I think the Netherlands cases are processed in Frankfurt.
Right. I think there's a couple of other countries now. I forget the countries, but I think there are some other countries where, again, they're sort of centralizing the work, which, to Roberto's use of the word, optimizing the work. That makes sense, right? We've got to do the work at a sensible, optimized way. But in those countries where you're asked to go to another place for an interview, for example, Portugal. In Portugal, you have to go to Paris for an interview. It's kind of bizarre. It would be a lot easier to just go to Madrid, but for whatever reason, they're sending people to Paris. It's a bit of a nuisance, but at least they let you do your medical locally. Like the Portuguese applicants, I believe, do their medical in Portugal, and then the Paris embassy recognizes that. So,
but what happens to those Madrid cases? Because I've seen quite a few.
Yeah, which one? So Madrid's still operating, but I was simply saying that, when you look at Portugal, it would make sense to drive 3 hours to the east and go to Madrid rather than driving, or flying actually to Paris, probably, because the drive to Paris is kind of, it's a bit of a long way. It's a nice trip. I've done it, but but yeah, it's a bit of a long way. So, there are certainly some impacts that were already happening under Biden of, trying to optimize, the way the work is done. But I don't think that's I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that's reasonable as long as they gear up those embassies to cope with the volumes. Frankfurt has done amazingly well coping with the work from Ukraine and Russia. Warsaw has done amazingly well. They have shown that they can increase the capacity of an embassy to to make up for whatever the work they suddenly have to do, right?
Yeah, and for example, there are some cases like Romania that has like 2 or 3 months backlog for visitor visas, and from March will enter the visa waiver, so the embassy will be less busy. So 10% makes sense there.
Do you know of any other countries like that, Philip?
No, I think we're the only one that we're entering.
That is coming into
March.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So if people don't have to apply for ESTAs, or rather can now apply for ESTAs online, that's work that the embassy doesn't even have to do. Presumably they were getting B1, B2 visas before. Yeah.
Did Bulgaria enter Schengen area recently, or was it just Romania? Okay, so it's probably also the Sofia embassy as well.
Could be, yeah. So yeah, that's.
I think that Schengen area has nothing to do with the visa waiver program, because they are asking for a rate of refusals on visas. Right. That's the reference for the waiver program. So Bulgaria has a higher rate of refusals. They will not be able to enter the program, because Schengen area is something that it's linked to Europe. It's an European, it's something that's linked to Europe.
That's correct. It's partly to do with the trustworthiness of the applicants. Like if a lot of people overstay their B1, B2, then trusting them with an ESTA, for example, is not a good thing. Having said that, if you give someone an ESTA, they have no ability to adjust status, whereas if you give them a B1, B2, they might. And they've got a status to adjust from. It's kind of a weird thing. I don't know quite how they work it out.
And an ESTA overstayer, for example, has no right to appeal a judge, of an immigration judge. You don't have, so you are just you're an overstayer on the ESTA.
Overstayer instantly,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Whereas
it.
with the
No right
B1,
to
you
appeal.
can, yeah. B1, you
Just-
can suddenly say I'm a refugee or whatever. I need to, I need to adjust status to some other, situation. So yeah, I don't think that's really.
And I can say that, for example, the embassy in Bucharest had a big social media campaign to make people renew their visa, so the refusal rate will drop. So maybe that's what helped us to get into the program. The visa
Okay,
waiver.
right, very good. Oh, very good. I believe I'm just putting up a message there from Surijan. Now, I think that's the Surijan from the Telegram channel that is representing Nepal a little bit. He's talking about KDU. So KDU has 4 consular officers, I think, is what Surijan is saying there. I know, again, so if we're talking about 10% reduction, 10% of 4, I don't think they're going to go down to 3. But KDU again has got sort of very high capacity. I'm surprised it's only 4 COs, frankly. I'm surprised at that. That sounds quite low for the amount of volume that they do, but I'm sure someone would make that point. Okay. Any other topics? Did any questions come in? Did you guys see interesting questions on this topic? I didn't see if there are any sort of questions there's all the normal questions. How about my number? Is it safe and all that sort of thing? But
well, I do have a question about what happens if the consular capacity is reduced, if there's some kind of friction and embassies are backlogged. I know that if embassies are backlogged, then interviews won't be scheduled, and that's bad for most DV winners. But on the other hand, if that leads to a faster visa bulletin progression, very few DV winners could benefit from that. I'm talking about the adjustment of status people.
Yeah. So that's So let's talk about that for a moment, right? So firstly, in terms of the way that the consulates operate, let's say that you had a consulate that did have a reduction in staff, they would likely reduce the monthly capacity that they tell KCC that they can accept. Now, they don't have to impact DV that way. They could say, okay, there will be a backlog increase, but that backlog increase will be on non-immigrant visas or other types of immigrant visas, because DV lottery and IR are the 2 sort of high priorities. So they could say, look, for us to get through the IR stuff that they just have to do, IR is the highest priority, right? To do the IR stuff that they have to do and to keep up with the DV lottery, we're going to have to slow down non-immigrant stuff. We'll slow down family-based stuff, and if you don't like it, give us the staff back. So that's kind of how the backlog could build. It doesn't necessarily mean automatically that DV backlog will increase, but it could. So then let's take your next point, Stoic. Let's say backlog increases. What happens is that the visa office, in theory, and this used to work better than it does now, but the visa office kind of work out the capacity based on the reports coming in from each of the embassies and consulates. So that the visa office know the capacity of the system. And so as the capacity were to reduce because the consulates have less staff, they would see that capacity reducing. And they would be aware of that, and they would kind of sense to not put so many cases through. On the other hand, they have this 55,000 number, or this year 52,000 number in mind, and so they also they're also looking, well, we're trying to get to that number, so we have to increase the capacity where we can, and that's where we tend to see these screw it things where they make a lot of people current, in order that some embassies that have the capacity can do the work, and the embassies that can't do the work because they're backlogged, they're just, sorry, we can't do anything about that, right? That's how I've observed it to work in the past. I don't know if you'd agree if that's how it would work, but I don't think it will have a sort of it doesn't necessarily mean, look, backlog increasing means higher VB numbers automatically. There's some nuance to it, is what I'm trying to say.
Got it.
That makes sense. Now, if if like what's happened with Africa over recent years, so Africa has consistently underfilled its quota for recent years. And as a result, we've seen them pushing more and more selectees in Africa, so much so that for DV25, all the other regions were reduced in terms of their numbers, and Africa was increased, right? Because they keep on saying, hang on a minute, we're trying to get to meet the quotas. That's what the law says we're supposed to do. So we better make more African selectees, right? And so they just keep pushing the number. And it's kind of the same thing happens on the visa bulletin to an extent as well. If they're increasing the VB number, but the issuances are not increasing, then that's another factor that they're going to use at the visa office to say, hang on, this isn't working. We're not issuing enough cases. We better increase the numbers a little bit that way. And that's kind of speaks to your hope or your point, Stoic. I think that's, you would be hoping that's how they would be looking at things. But I'm not entirely sure that would be the main driver. I have an email from Charlie. I reached out to Charlie, who used to be the guy that ran the visa office and did the visa bulletin numbers. And I sent him an email out of the blue and said, here's what I think you do. Can you confirm that's what you do? And I'll have to publish that email. It's kind of an interesting response. I was very happy that he responded. And he came back and said, yeah, that's pretty much exactly right. Here's what we do. We take the capacity, blah, blah, blah. He explained the process. So it's kind of an interesting finding. Well, I appreciate that he even answered the email, frankly, because who the hell am I, Okay. Any other thoughts?
How do you think this year is going with Africa? Because from the data I've seen, it's still the least performing region besides North America.
Which one's the least performing for Africa?
Yeah,
Africa has got what, 5,700 visas issued so far, right? So Africa tends to have slightly longer 221G periods, I think, than others. They also tend to have more no-shows than other regions. They also have a lower derivative rate than other regions. They're at about 1.65, whereas EU, for example, is about 2.25. So basically, for lots of reasons, they have to schedule a lot of cases in Africa to get the same number of visas issued as other regions, right? And this is part of the sort of the frustration I'm sure the government has, where they don't get that reaction or that feedback from pushing all these these visas out. That information is often, I'm thinking of Curtis right now, it's often misinterpreted, in my opinion, to being some sort of racism against Africans and Africa in general. But it's not. It's simply, in my opinion, you look at every year you'll see the highest number of scheduled appointments is going to be Africa by far, a lot more in Africa. But their numbers sometimes are pretty close to that of EU. And that's the derivative rate, and that's, no-shows and refusals, etc. So that's where it is. Now, I would say in your numbers this week that you just published, there are, 917, perhaps even more now with the latest update, of 2NLs for Africa this week, right?
Yeah.
Now, a good month for Africa would be like 2,000 2NLs, right? That would be a good month for Africa. In fact, a good month for the globe as a whole would be probably, we've seen some months where it was about 4,000. In February of 23, they did 4,500 interviews, scheduled interviews for April. So April, May, June are the months that I always feel should be the busiest months, right? And so I'm hoping the 1,900 2NLs that we've seen so far set up mainly for April, I'm hoping we'll see, at least that again, so that we get 3,000, 3,500, maybe even get to 4,000. And if we do, the majority of those is going to be in Africa, right? So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these African cases coming through as being approved. Does that make sense? Would you agree, or that's just DV charts? Let's look.
Actually, for Africa, we're a little bit above 1,000 now of 2.5 cents
this week. Okay, and that includes the March ones, right? Because like Yerevan got a bunch of 2NLs, like 96 2NLs, but I think those were March.
Africa. I don't think Africa had a lot of these.
Of those ones, right?
Yeah,
I think it was EU, Yerevan. I think perhaps Vienna.
Vienna. I think 3 cases.
Yeah. So look, here's the other thing. There are 3,200 cases issued so far for the 5,700. They got 2,700. I mean, they've got this fairly big balloon of cases about to hit in February and March, which, they've got a fairly big ready pot. Now, some of those will already be no-shows, but they are pushing on those. And then this is Friday's data, and there's another, 200? Is it, Philip? Another 200 to go on to this 579 of additional 2NL since Friday.
It's 1,003 in total. So
1,000 for Africa.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So there's going to be another sort of 500 there, which, if you think about it, 1,003, that's 1,700 people. And that 1,700 people is not in that number, not in that 13,124 number. The cases is accurate, but for the in-transit cases, Zarthisius doesn't add them into that number, I don't believe. So, they've put nearly 15,000 people in Africa into scheduling so far. And, that's a pretty good number. So I don't feel it's going badly. I was interested, Philip, in your percentage assessments that showed EU has used 36% of its quota so far. Africa is about 25%, right? OC and SA are going mad. They're going nuts, right?
43% for OC.
Yeah.
52. So South America is over the 50%.
Over 50%. Yeah. Which is in 4.5 months. This is, there's only 4.5 months of activity, although mostly the interviews are carried out at the beginning of the month or earlier in the month. So, if you split a month into 2 halves, it won't necessarily be the same in the second half as the first half. But yeah, I personally, I don't see this as going too bad. Like, there are more numbers to be added onto this. There are, but if we look at the in-transit plus the extras that have come this weekend, that's going to be taking our totals to about 34,000. And if we look at if we look at DV charts for 24, so what I do there is just sort of roll this back in time, back to I went back, I think, to March 2nd and looked at those numbers. So at this same point, or rather at the end of February, in DV24, 34,000 people had been scheduled, 16,000. We're almost exactly at those numbers right now, today, right? And we haven't seen all the 2NLs for February sent out yet. There'll be more. So we're ahead of DV24, slightly ahead, not massively, but slightly ahead of DV24. We're behind DV23, funnily enough, because of DV23 got this massive February, which I remember it was huge, 4,500 2NLs in 1 month. So yeah, but we're doing well. I don't think we're doing badly, particularly when you consider they're not trying to get to 55,000; they're only trying to get to 52,000. So again, that's sort of 6% in the bag kind of thing. So I think it's going pretty well. Okay, this is just while we're talking, and unless you got any other quick questions, we'll wrap it up shortly. But this is kind of an interesting question for me, for me to talk about. I had reason to go and review my explanation. I think it was maybe a question you had asked, Philip, about how the quotas are calculated. And I went and reviewed that video I did sitting in my car outside my daughter's horse riding lessons, and I sort of just talked about the quota process and how that's calculated, and it comes from a formula, but the upshot of it is that high admission regions have a large number of the immigrant population already coming into the USA, and so the regions of South America and Asia are where most of the immigration comes from, right? And so those two regions are reversed. It kind of reverses. It's almost like an 80-20 split between the two. So 80% come from Asia and South America, and so and 20% come from the rest of the world. So the DV lottery says, okay, so to counteract that, we'll give 80% of the visas to not Asia and not South America, and only give 20% of the diversity visas to those two high admission regions. And it's quite a clever way of looking at things. If you take my point, it's like, okay, that's I like what the DV lottery does. It's a good policy. I like
diversity means that.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want everybody who's come from England or something. God, that would be awful. You can't have just people from one country. That's not diversity. And the diversity gives America a better balance of, so that even people that are worried about immigration from certain countries, for example, or from certain religions, that is helped by having diversity of immigration, because then you've got more people coming of different, different perspectives, different backgrounds and races. And that can be a helpful thing. It truly becomes a melting pot. So, in a sense, it could help us avoid some of the problems that we see in some parts of Europe, for example, today with certain types of immigration. So I hope they continue it. I hope so. Okay. Any final sort of thoughts, guys? I'd be kind of interested if you have any other worries, concerns, points.
No, I saw some comments that were asking about potential travel bans, but I think you had a video for that.
Yeah, and I think this is where we need Pete, right? Pete in the Telegram group has studied a lot about the travel bans, etc., and he scared everyone a little bit with his map. But I think a travel ban is almost certain for Iran. Because there's two things. There's going to be the sort of the anti-American sentiment from the government, and also the Muslim majority country, and there'll be the terrorism concerns and all that sort of thing. But there's also going to be the direct pissed offness that Trump has because of the assassination plot there apparently was from Iran to try and kill Trump. So I think that's probably. He's a vindictive person. He's gonna get them back for that. But it may include some other countries as well. But I haven't wanted to speculate which other countries would be included, because it's a country that doesn't cooperate with America is a concern as far as the recent executive order is concerned, and that's how the third travel ban was crafted as well. It was like these countries don't have good systems, or they don't cooperate with us well, and so we're going to give a 90-day travel ban. During those 90 days, they can fix the problems if they want, right? And that's what happened to Chad. Chad was banned for 90 days, and after 90 days, it was taken off the banned list because they had presumably said, "Okay, fair enough, we'll cooperate with you. We'll make our systems available to you." So I think they'll probably do a similar sort of thing again. Make sense?
Well, as a follow-up question, I'm wondering if Iranian nationals are banned from coming to the United States, would embassies that process Iranian cases perform differently? Because I think capacity would open up from Asia cases. I'm talking about embassies like Yerevan and Ankara. And there's one more, I believe, that take care of Iranian cases.
So we've seen this movie before, Stoic, right? What happened before was The ban was put in place. We then sued them, right? The Gomez case was suing the government. Now, you've already mentioned there was a couple of things that were done during that case. The first thing that happened in the Gomez case, and that was a DV 2020 case, was on September 4th, 2020, the Judge Mehta, told the government to immediately start processing visas, even though the people were banned, right? So on September 4th, between September 4th and September 30th, where embassies had sit there and said, look, you're banned. We're not doing your interview. You're banned, right? There is a general travel ban on these countries, so you're not coming in. And so, and that was the COVID ban at the time. But what they did was Judge Mehta said, open up the doors and you can process the visas, even though the people are not allowed to enter, on the hope that people can enter later after the COVID concerns were over, right? So between September 4th of 2020 and September 30th, about 7,000 visas were issued directly as a result of the Gomez lawsuits and the other lawsuits that were combined in there, right? So this is the work of Jesse Bless and team, Charles Cook and team, Curtis Morrison and team. You know, all of those lawsuits were combined under one, and that was tremendous. An extra 7,000 visas were issued. And the majority of those people were then able to enter the USA later because they had 6 months validity and they were able to get into the USA before that validity ran out. So let's say they banned Iran, right? And let's say they do it in a month's time or so. They ban Iran. It will be up to those Iranians to decide whether they want to take the same approach and have their interviews and get their visa, even knowing that they are not allowed to enter the USA and they have a restricted period of time to enter the USA. It would be up to them. But the embassies themselves would be legally required to process those cases. You're entitled to have your adjudication, even if you can't enter. And the president can block entry, but he can't block adjudication. That's basically what came out of that lawsuit in DV 2020. Does that make sense, Derek? So the bad news is, from your perspective as a Turkish, European, the bad news is, let's take Ankara, for example. They could not say, okay, from now on, we're only going to deal with EU cases. We're not going to take those AOS cases, which are predominantly Iranian cases. They couldn't do that. They wouldn't be allowed to do that. They have to work through their processes. And the AV process that we see today was produced during that era. And, as we've got one of the lawsuits produced a statement that said it goes alphabetically. And I never quite believed it, but I think it's actually true, where Africa goes before Asia and Asia goes before EU and so on. So they go through the processes, which is why we see chunks of, 1 month you'll see a bunch of Asian cases at Ankara, and then the next month it will be nothing but EU. It's not that they're deciding to only do that, it's because they're switching between those within that sort of large AV queue they're managing. So yeah, I think they'll continue doing the interviews, frankly. But you might get a lot more no-shows, right? Because people might say, well, if I'm banned, why am I going to waste my money, right?
Right, but a no-show would still mean an interview slot is being taken. Yes,
but the embassy will possibly, if it happened over a period of time, they might make certain assumptions and say, hey, we don't think, last week half the people cancelled. So when we set our capacity for next month, we're going to assume that half the people will just cancel or not show up, right?
Gotcha.
So it could feed into, because they don't have to do all the background work. When they sit down and produce, they interview someone, there's some background paperwork to do, right? And so that administrative burden is reduced from the embassy, and they might say, hey, we're a bit quiet around here because we're getting a lot of no-shows. So therefore, we can do a few more interviews next month. Maybe. I mean, Ankara is almost beyond hope at the moment. But,
right. I think the good thing about Ankara is that there are no surprises. People know that it will not perform.
Is it? I mean, really? Like, people are just like accepting their fate in Turkey, I think. I mean, well,
this year specifically, and I've been active in this Turkish forum website about green cards. This year, yep, that's the one. So this year specifically, a lot of Turkish nationals are actually transferring their cases, and they believe the general understanding is that it's because of the updated FAM. Places like Vienna, Hong Kong, and Bangkok are popular destinations.
Yeah.
But of course, I mean, majority of the cases are still in Ankara.
Yeah.
I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy for you because 26K in Ankara would mean it's
right. Yeah. I am kind of immune to consular performance, luckily, because I'll try to do adjustment of status. Which,
make sure you're ready.
If anyone who are AOS, or I mean, if anyone who's watching is also an AOS applicant or will be an AOS applicant, good news about these federal employee staff reduction is that USCIS, which will evaluate the AOS cases, I think they are less likely to have a reduction in force compared to Department of State employees.
Right. Yeah. They want more enforcement and administrative people in the immigration world.
USCIS is Homeland Security, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, you got Homeland Security.
It's a different department.
That's it's a sub department, I think, of USCIS, or the other way around. I can't remember which. But yeah. That's a good point, Stuart. I think that's absolutely spot on. Don't forget to take advantage of your early filing policy, right? And I'm sure you're following someone's mum, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, she's awesome. She helped me through my green card application 10 years ago, or whatever it was. There's some nice people around. I'd say there's some really good. I mean, someone's mum's incredible. I've met her personally. She's really good. She lives near me. Also, Susie Q from that forum. The three of us have had dinner together a couple of times, so it's been nice. Anyway, very good. All right, final thoughts, gentlemen. Don't want to keep you all day. I know you've all got people waiting for you. Philip, especially you. The boys. How have you not had the boys crash in?
Sorry.
How come the kids are not coming into the room saying, "Daddy, what are you doing?"
They were away. They just got home now, so you might hear them at the door.
Okay. Tell them you're famous. I pinged Zarthisius and said, you're more than welcome to join us, of course. And he said he couldn't because his kids would have been hassling him to become YouTube famous. And so if he was actually now on YouTube, they'd be too excited, but he's always famous. He's been an amazing contributor to the community for years. So it's awesome. I also just want to give a shout out to Narek, No in the Telegram forum. Narek sent me the Excel spreadsheet that he uses to take Zarthisius's data and plot it into that spreadsheet. It's kind of awesome. It's got some nice Excel work going on there. So I'm going to try and find a way of publishing that data as a supplement to what Zarthisius does. I'll discuss it with Zarth and see what he says about that as well. I've only got a WordPress. Britt Simon Says is a WordPress account. It's a piece of crap, really, but oh well. you wouldn't put up with it, Philip, right? You did your own site, right?
No, it's still WordPress because it was the fastest I can build it with.
He has a WordPress T-shirt on his, Telegram profile.
I did.
I hadn't noticed.
So he's not against WordPress at all.
Oh, I didn't realize. But he built his own site, you see. Yeah.
I did quite a lot of money with WordPress, so I can complain about it.
What was that real about you doing work from like 8 years old? Did you really mean that?
Yeah, that's when I started learning PHP, mainly to do something with game modding. So
that's funny. The funny thing is, what people don't know about me is I'm probably the least well-qualified person on this panel right now. I'm probably the least intelligent of all of us, and probably the least educated of all of us. So, it's yeah. I somehow managed to bullshit my way through life. So, anyway, guys, well, I appreciate you chatting. I love seeing you in the flesh, and I appreciate all of your help and contributions. You guys, Stoic, you've been asking me some really interesting, thoughtful questions on Brit Simon Says for quite some time, and I appreciate all those questions. They normally get me thinking. Sometimes I don't have complete time to answer your sort of this much writing, so you might get a one-liner back. But I appreciate the input. And Roberto, you're a sweet guy, lovely guy, and a master at the Photoshop pictures of me. I appreciate that. Always good for a chuckle. And thanks, Philip, for all the work that you do as well. That really, people love that daily stuff. I've discussed daily updates with Zarthisius many times, and I tend to agree with him. It's nice to have a sort of a weekly update because people just get too confused all the time. But for those of us actually, sort of actively involved in this, in this world of DV, it's really nice to have that daily data and the daily updates. So, appreciate that. And I'm sure many people do.
I started it for me because I couldn't stand weekly updates. I wanted to see progress daily.
You wanted to know. Yeah. And now you can still get capture solver.
What do you think about it? Look at that data. What do you think about it? Are we screwed up? No, don't worry about it. Okay.
I'm loving the American flag stuff in the background of your rooms there. Like Roberto and Philip, you've both got American flags, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're ready.
This one is for you. This is for you.
Snap. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh dear. Love you guys. Thank you so much for joining this morning. Appreciate it. Let's do this again sometime. It's been fun.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.